family mode.
Hey everybody, it's Joe and my friend Deborah, and I'm really excited about this week. Deborah and I went to business school together, and I don't mind saying right in front of her, I am a fanboy of hers. So, as you probably know, I do marketing for a living, and I have my marketing people to look up to, and she is one of them. So, she was, tell me if I got it wrong, directionally right, handled top levels of marketing for Pulte Homes, for Toyota, for Chrysler, for McDonald's, and now the chief marketing officer globally for GM. That's a pretty impressive resume. And if you have any openings, I would love to work for you.
You never know. Life throws things at us, doesn't it?
Well, I'm out here in Seattle. I don't know if I could, dial it in, or I'd have to move out to Michigan, because I don't think Beth would go for that at all.
Well, now that we're seeing how everyone can work and is working so differently with everything that we've been through, maybe you could stay there.
But the folks on the call, Deborah and I spoke a little bit beforehand. There are lots of questions you'd like to ask her, which we may not be able to ask at all, because I will remind you that General Motors is a publicly traded company. And so there are things that she can and cannot talk about. So I'm going to have a very broad, tell us a story, and then we'll see if we can get her to answer a question or two. But first, I understand you got a case of the COVIDs yourself.
Yeah, it's really been quite a journey going through this whole thing. It was an incredible thing. Right before lockdown, my mother was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian. She went in for her first chemo in the middle of March, and a couple days after that, suddenly was experiencing all chills, fever, all these things that it could have been related to the chemo or not. My boyfriend and I.
For this?
Pardon me?
She was not inpatient for chemo.
Yeah, no. I mean, this was the first time we'd been through any of this, so they just immediately, because her cancer was quite severe, wanted to get her in, and it was at the very beginning stages of all of this. It was at the end of, I guess that was at the end of March, actually, her first chemo treatment. And then, so we were helping her, and my boyfriend and I were there every night cooking my parents' dinner and all that. She tells me she has chills. I fall asleep next to her because I'm exhausted after working all day, mouth open, right? 2 days later, I've got all the symptoms of chemo, the fever, of COVID, and the fever and everything. My boyfriend gets it 2 days later. So what's astounding is, one, how quickly this thing does go through, and then the longevity of, while we were lucky to not have the severe respiratory issues with it, it is a long, it's an ailment that takes a long time. It was over 6 weeks, and you still experience some. For me, at least, that is made it even more relevant as we go through all the stages of recovery and what we as a company have to go through, as an industry, as a country, all of these things that we really need to go through to keep each other safe and protected and go through that. I have firsthand experience, and so many of my teammates have experienced things with their families and everything. It makes it incredibly real and vital for us
today?
How's what?
Your mother?
She's much better. She's on her 3rd chemo treatment. She came through the first COVID, and unfortunately, we don't have any proof of immunity yet, but we're hoping that that's really kept her safe. And unbelievably enough, my father, who's in the home with her, he's almost 90, and has had is completely susceptible to everything.
Nursing home on top of it.
I know, exactly.
The nursing home that was the outbreak is 5 miles from my house.
So
Yeah, we're still under lock and key here.
Yeah, and I think it's wise, as you see, again, how quickly it moves, how fast, and how much it affects everyone, that we all have to be extremely cautious.
One last COVID question. You got a really mild case of it. What was that like? Did it just feel like a cold? What was it for you?
For me, it was sore throat, cough, fever, aches, pains. But the most incredible thing is this level of exhaustion. And, we're working remotely, and I had to actually put down I couldn't do anything. I couldn't get on any devices or anything because the exhaustion level was so acute. It was crazy. And then, like I said, loss of smell, which I still have. It's driving me out of my mind. And then just periodic issues with stomach issues, or felt like inflammation in your body. And, 2 days you'd be fine. And everyone said 8 days later, really watch it. Precisely to 8 days, I was back in bed again. And so it's been a start-stop, and you just never feel completely recovered. And we had very mild cases of it. So
besides now, you feel completely recovered now?
Yeah. Now it's pretty good. But every now and then, every couple, you never know.
Okay.
You can be fine for 5 days or a week, and then you have a little setback. And it seems like it's already.
Now, since you've talked, I guess word's gotten around the interwebs, our audience has doubled. So, for the people who just joined us, Deborah's my friend from business school. She's a pretty big deal in the world of marketing. And she is now the global chief marketing officer for GM, which is a publicly traded company. So there are some questions that you will ask that she will not be able to answer. And instead, we agreed that I would just say, so tell us about ventilators at GM, whatever you can share.
Yeah, I think the whole ventilator experience for GM has been life-changing or very pivotal. First of all, for the company's ability to answer the call to help during the crisis times when everything was complete lockdown. I have utmost respect for our teams of engineers. I think the other thing it showed is the ability of supply chain management, and what that can do when we as a country are faced with a crisis like this is quite astounding. I think for anyone who's followed it, you might have heard a bit of the story that Mary Barra got the call from Ventec, and within a day or two had sent a team out to Ventec, close to where you are, I believe, to meet with them. They flew out, quickly met, and then within 18 days were able to map out. Can you hear? I hope you don't mind. Can you hear that noise behind me?
With somebody flying overhead?
No, it's
your
mowers.
Landscaper decided to show up?
Yeah, the lawn guys are here, and actually things are growing because it's finally spring in Michigan. Anyways, it was actually incredible. So from the first day of that first trip out to Ventec, 18 days later, our teams had mapped out a complete supply chain assessment and a manufacturing assessment. Now, we were lucky to have one plant, Kokomo, which actually had the white room facilities, because that is where we do a lot of the high-tech product and robot manufacturing. So it had to be a full clean room already. So we were able to use that as a base to move forward and go. And I think the underlying effort consistently on the teams who worked nonstop 24/7 to identify the supply chain, find the supplies, and then help Ventec really produce at a level of volume that they had never experienced before. It was a true team effort. Everyone was gung-ho. If anyone saw the 60 Minutes episode on it, some of our team had delayed retirement so that they could help and come full throttle into this. So I think the key impact that it's had for us as a company is, one, 18 days has become, for good or bad, a new benchmark for the company about what we can achieve in innovation and address a challenge in that short a time when we're all focused on it. It was a whole new way of working, as there was
like a marketing campaign.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it is certainly defining all of our marketing campaigns going forward, because now we have a new benchmark of 18 days. So you're like, well, if we could do an incredible whole supply chain and go from something that we'd never had experience producing before to now producing fully, very sophisticated health and medical equipment, why can't you get out?
I already have so many questions which you may or may not be able to answer. The first one is, if we just think about Ventec, they are producing, with your help, exponentially more than they ever have before. Are you using the same suppliers? I mean, did we just go to theirs and say, crank it up, guys, or did you have to go source other companies that could supply things that their suppliers were providing?
I think it was a combination of both. We went and sourced out, one with the supply chain knowledge at much more sort of global reach, and then the capability of really finding what could we do to help the current suppliers, and then where can you source more to really fit the demand. So it was a combination.
Another thing, and this is more than you can probably share with me, but I just think GM is very, very big, but I can't conceptualize how many buildings globally and here and there. You mentioned a facility. Is that the only place the ventilators are made?
Yes, currently, because again, you had to have clean room facilities, so it's not all of our plants that have that capability. So right now it's focused in Kokomo.
And does that facility, if you can share it, only make ventilators now?
No, well, we're looking at, what else we do is we restart production overall. So it won't be only ventilators as we go forward. So I think it's an evolving situation in terms of what our capabilities are with all of our manufacturing.
Right.
First, number one priority, which has also been fascinating, is safety protocols. So for any of us to start up, we have a medical expert, Dr. Jeffrey Hess, who's on board. He was served in the military, dealt with, had a background of really being trained to deal with biological warfare, all of these types of things, has now really helped set the standard for how many plants, manufacturers, communities, schools, everything, think about how do we all get back to work safely? What are the protocols that we need to make sure that we do keep everyone safe, as we need to help the economy start back up, but it has to be with the number one safety in mind. So we've developed a whole set of safety protocols about how you do that, how you go back to work, that we've shared with everyone. They're available online, and we're actually spending many times on webinars, Dr. Hess and some of our manufacturing colleagues on sharing that first in the communities where our plants are, and then anyone who needs it. I know I'm on the board of a school that my son goes to, and I've actually shared it with them, because everyone has to think about how do we go back to work, to school, etc., but how do we do it safely and make sure that we're putting protocols in place.
I'm going to ask a question from my friend Kathleen. She asks, how has the pandemic changed your supply chain? What precautions are you requiring on the production line for your vendors and at GM?
Yeah, well, I think that's exactly, it's changed everything. And I think if anyone follows any of the news in the automotive industry, so we're dependent on many sources for parts and et cetera. And some of our plants in the U.S. are dependent on Mexico being able to start up safely as well to move the supply chain. So that is all getting looked at in a very microscopic way about how we do it safely. Then we have significant protocols. I mean, you have the typical questionnaire. Obviously, everyone is given a mask. We started a mask production facility as well, because we knew that while there was demand overall in the healthcare industry, we also knew to come back to work that we would have to be able to supply all of our people on a daily basis with masks so that we could effectively go back to work. Just a small part, when you think of the logistics even behind that, it's quite incredible how many are required. We actually sent out to everyone before we went back to work 2 weeks ago, started sending out to every employee just some safety protocol standards and 5 masks to every family, so that they could really anticipate, understand, and everyone really get used to working in this new environment. In fact, I was taking the safety course today about how do you get ready to go back to work. Of course, the key thing that everyone has is how do you wear your mask with your glasses and make sure that they don't fog up. So, I mean, those sound like little things.
Water.
Exactly. And, where do you place the mask? Do you put it on your nose and then put your glasses right above it, nestled on top of it? I mean, I think we're all going to have to really learn how to get comfortable with that to keep each other safe. So these things sound like little things, but when you're thinking about retraining everyone, it's very challenging the first week or so that you wear a mask to work, and think about how do you interact, how do you make sure that you're able to do that effectively and comfortably enough so that it's not anxiety driven.
I'll tell you, I knew our conversation would go this way because I've already spooled a half dozen questions, and I'm like, no, let her finish talking. We hear a lot about, on just the national news, about meat packing facilities. Now, I've never been to a meat packing facility, nor have I been to a production line at GM, but I imagine there's lots of humans close together. Have you needed to put up all sorts of protocols and PPE and things to protect employees from one another?
Yeah, the biggest, actually, if you go on a production line or facility, the actual workstations are fairly separated. So that once you get in, there's a little more stability with that. The biggest issues are the trades between shifts. As we've talked to our leader, Gerald Johnson, and who leads manufacturing, and his concerns, it's that how do you get people into the plant in a safe manner? Because typically that's a lot of people coming in at one time. There's shifts, and then, of course, where do you eat and how do you eat safely? Everyone obviously needs to take their masks off. So that has been the biggest issue, along with between changes of shifts. How do you make sure that there's enough time? Usually, as you can imagine, in manufacturing, it's all clockwork. You're trying to minimize time, minimize any delay time between changing people at stations, et cetera. So now all of that has been elongated or looked at very differently, so that we can make sure that people get in safely, get to their places safely, can take their breaks and their lunch hours, or whenever they need to eat safely. All of that changes all the timing. But again, that's number one priority. Make sure we can do that safely, and then have time to clean between every shift. That's the other key important point. So it's changed dramatically. And again, I think I look at with great admiration on the teams that are doing this. They're looking at efficiency protocols, but safety overall, how we can get all that done in the best way possible, but making sure priorities that everyone's safe.
Of course, masks are considered medical devices, so it won't surprise you that I and my group talk about them. And you can't turn on any medium now without hearing about the I'm not going to wear a mask, I'm going to wear a mask kind of camps. In an organization as large as yours, I have to imagine that there's some subsegment of your employee base who doesn't want to wear a mask or resents being told to wear a mask. Has that been an issue in terms of protocol and having people come to work?
Well, it's really unfortunate if anything does get politicized, because this is all about each of us being concerned about the safety of everyone else. Mm-hmm. It's not a personal issue, control issue. So we have as a requirement now in all of our facilities that you do wear a mask for precisely that issue. I don't know if everyone knows this, but for GM, safety is a part of our culture. We actually start every single meeting with a safety message and it could be about a safety issue in the workplace. We have them about making sure no one will trip over things that everyone has in the workplace, in winter and stuff, all the way to safety about what you do on a daily basis. So that's how we start every single meeting. So it's really part of our culture and personality. So the idea of wearing a mask just fits into that. It's really part of the culture. It's what we believe is the most important thing that we can all do to keep each other safe. So it is really part of the mandatory protocol.
So any pushback has been kind of just muffled, I imagine. You needn't answer, but that's what I'm thinking. I want this job, and that's what it's going to take, so okay.
Yeah, it's got to be the priority. We keep each other safe.
The reports about how many ventilators are actually needed and where they're needed is something that's been pretty hard to pin down. As I understand it, back, I think it was maybe week 2 or 3 of these calls that we started back in March, we had a robust conversation about ventilator production, because as you likely know, Medtronic was one of the first to say, here's the design of this ventilator. We're making it open source. Anybody who can make it, because we need to make lots. And there was conversation about how practical that was and how robust their, transfer plans and the like were. And at the end of the conversation, I, as one individual of 250,000 in the group, came to the conclusion that it was pretty impractical for anybody starting from scratch to go make a ventilator, unless you were a GM, a Ford, a Dyson, a huge group. There was not practically going to be any contract manufacturer who had some spare capacity go make some ventilators because of all the regulations, et cetera, et cetera. And as I understand it, Dyson took the challenge. They got, a ventilator protocol ready, and the NHS in the UK said, you know what, we're good. We don't actually need you to do that. As I understand it, but do not know, only you and Ford were previously not in the ventilator production business and making them now. Do you know differently, or is it just the two companies?
I don't. I think there's probably a lot going on in this world. We're just focused on what we can contribute and do. I do think that, having the engineering expertise along with specific supply chain expertise, which means down to the most minute requirements, has been important for our effort. Mm-hmm. And, when you build a car, there are so many parts to it, you have to make sure they all are precise and fit. And so when you're building something that is obviously for, save someone's life and in a hospital setting, I think it's that preciseness which is important. But I can't comment or don't know anything about any other efforts.
Well, let me ask the folks on the call, type a message if you're aware of any organization making ventilators today that we're not, other than GM and Ford. Speaking of Ford, has Mary had any conversation with Ford at that kind of level, like, hey, this is a global crisis, friendly competition, how are we going to tackle this ventilator thing together, or no?
I think it was, there's always discussion and alignment overall. And I think what was really good for the country is, Ford aligned with someone to really help their effort. Mary was introduced to Ventec early on. They've been incredible, and I think what their ventilator was very interesting from, what we've all learned now about ventilators and, mm-hmm. How compact it should be so that it can be mobile, et cetera. So there's always that kind of discussion. I think that it's been really productive for everyone to see it go in two different paths.
I know I wouldn't want to be a ventilator salesperson next year. No joke. It's just we're going to have so many that are made for this, high point that how will you possibly? And hospitals, of course, have taken a huge haircut because all elective surgeries were put on hold for a while. Their bottom lines have been crushed, and therefore purchases of any capital equipment are going to be challenging. Do you happen to know if the relationship with Ventec, does it have an end to it? Is it, now that we have this capacity, we can continue to make ventilators because you guys were making so few, and we, do you have any kind of sense, or can you share is there an expiration date to that relationship?
I can't share any of that, and I think it's, it's such an evolving situation in any case, mm-hmm. that we all have to, with all of our business decisions, remain extremely fluid right now. Okay. We just really can't. None of us can know.
Cool. I appreciate that. I'm just looking at some of the other questions here. Yeah, my friend John wrote a lot of questions, and I'm going to try to process them a little bit here. In the meanwhile, can you, just in the spirit of the way we started our conversation, are there other stories related to this whole ventilator episode that would interest the audience?
I don't know. As Joe, your audience is a new one for me, as I'm always in marketing. But I think that what's really been phenomenal, as for all of us, as we think about what this means, we look at a lot of what are the learnings from this whole COVID crisis to what we do. So first of all, the agility and collaboration just shows what we as a country, as an industry, et cetera, can achieve. going forward, and we've set ourselves a whole bunch of new benchmarks. I think the way we work has changed dramatically. We're all, for the most part, in our homes, or for people who are together somewhere, we have to figure out how to really be productive and safe. So I think that's going to change protocols for the next year or so. I think all of the way that we interact socially has changed dramatically for at least until we get a consistent vaccine going out. And I think people that think that we'll get back to, quote, how it was before are missing sort of the whole consumer sentiment and needs. Something we're seeing that is a major trend going on is, personal safety. We all talk about safety, but it's this idea of really personal safety that's changed dramatically. For the auto industry, this goes all the way from, we've launched something with our dealerships called Clean, so that when people get into their car, the new car they've just purchased, they have a confidence level about what's happened inside the vehicle. We're seeing trends that people are looking for their own safe spaces, so I would anticipate that ride sharing changes dramatically, at least for the next 2 years. Personal mobility is, had a whole different definition. So I think as we think about those trends, no matter what industry anyone's working on, certainly in the healthcare industry and medical industry, how do we develop things that could be used on a wider basis for the population as they think about all these concerns? So I think we'll see a lot of that transferred to the protocols that you have when you go into hospital, transferring to protocols as we go to work, how we do all that.
I'm reading these questions, and I'm going to apologize to our audience. I'm pretty sure that either due to confidentiality or specificity in terms of engineering of a ventilator and costs and things, that Deborah's not the right person to ask. So instead, I'm going to shift a bit as just a marketing fanboy and ask my marketing hero a question or two. The information that you get about consumer sentiment is probably more significant than the information that I get. How, from your vantage point, might you counsel industry to think about the trepidation on a B2B level and a B2C level about making major purchases?
Yeah, I think the key right now is staying agile and flexible. We see fairly good indications, at least in two key sectors of automotive and home building, that there is still a lot of interest going on. And those are usually the barometers for how strong an economy is and how quickly our restart will be, along with longer term trends. So at least for the moment, those indicators are much more positive than I would have thought. So therefore, if you're planning investments or things, that's one thing to watch out, to take into consideration. However, we all just can't predict. I was reading, obviously I follow sports a lot, because sports is also an indicator of, how people feel about the economy overall and where they're going to go and invest. The interest, if anyone watched over the long weekend in golf, was huge. They had 5.8 million viewers watching golf. NFL has stated that they're going to do everything they can to safely start the season up again. I think all of that's great. I think we will see in the next month or so what happens as some of this socializing starts getting to a different point on whether we can do those activities safely or not, or something more significant happens. So therefore, back to your investment question, we're keeping everything as agile as possible, asking for flexibility from all of our partners, going ahead with plans that take into account this positive outlook right now that we're seeing from consumers and industry in the market in the US. But I think we have to all remain very cautious about it.
How, if you can share, are you thinking about your marketing of GM products, given what by definition has been completely gone demand or significantly dissipated demand? Not so much from a well, less revenue in, that means lower marketing budgets, but just, demand will take care of itself, and therefore we don't need to be spending nearly at the level that we used to.
Yeah. I think we have a couple key trends. One, from consumers overall, you're having a big demand for joy and optimism going on, which is very interesting. The second thing we're seeing is that there's a lot of localization going on. So where we might have been a major national player, there is different startup levels in every state, as we all know. So very different demand levels going on. Third is we put an incredible amount of investment over the last 18 months into digital and knowing our consumers and having databases that can do high propensity modeling, which means that you can target specifically people who would be more likely to buy a Cadillac or a GMC. That investment's paying off right now as we're seeing significant increases in our ability to use those dollars to target effectively, and then the return from that investment with high propensity consumers. So I think that trend is going overall. And then finally, the last trend on platforms, I think because there's no new content in film or TV production, we still don't know where sports are going to go. You're seeing the rise of very important platforms that are really taking off. A lot of streaming, of course, but also TikTok. And I don't know how many of you on the call do TikTok. I don't personally get it at my age, but
you know what? I have to think that's going to die out. I mean, there's just so many times you can put together 10 seconds worth of you pop in to a very,
and that's where you're showing your age, You're showing your age.
Was I like the most possible dad right there by going like this, pop in?
Well, remember now, Joe, I remember you from your theatrical days.
I do remember this.
Such an impact. So I think you should be looking at TikTok more. Maybe
I just can't find myself doing it. But thank you. I appreciate the vote.
Yeah. But so that's huge gaming. Obviously, everything's getting launched on gaming now. So how do we incorporate the learnings from gaming, the engagement? What's been fascinating is to look at consumers. They haven't lost, even though they've been quarantined in their homes, they haven't lost contact with their friends and their peer group because they're gaming and they're in that virtual space with them all the time. So I think we all need to understand the implications for that, because yes, it affects B2C marketing, but also B2B, how we interact overall. I think everyone's getting tired of Zoom conferences because they're a little tiring. So how do you take the whole virtual world into the next level? I think that's going to be our challenge going forward as we learn how to work and be much more efficient. And then finally, I think there's some benefits to this. I don't know how much you used to travel before, but my travel was nonstop. I don't miss it, which is very astounding. I never thought I would say that. And we've learned to really do well in very productive calls and meetings with people by not having to travel. So all those costs.
I think commercial real estate is due to crater.
Very interesting. I think, the whole idea of the concept of the traditional office workspace, we've just broken that whole thing apart. So, it's been a really difficult time, but we're having fundamental pivots in behavior and learning to work together and consumer behavior that I think are lasting and will change forever the way we think about things.
I know you're difficult to make blush, so I'll say one of the reasons I'm such a fanboy is because GM and McDonald's are major, major brands, and the levels of decisions that you make for consumers. I mean, there's nothing that doesn't touch driving and eating. I can talk B2B about a ventilator. Okay, who wants to eat? So where I can just say medical device manufacturers, don't worry so much about Instagram, and you sure don't need to be doing a TikTok about a syringe. You have to be, have your finger on the pulse of everything, which just fascinates me. Do you have a comment, personal or otherwise, about this week's Hertz bankruptcy?
Yeah, well, one, extremely unfortunate and a real challenge in the industry overall. But again, I think it shows how we think about these fundamental shifts that are going to impact us forever. their business model got extremely challenged. I hope that they'll make it through, and I know they've been exploring new methodologies and ways overall. So we'll see about where that comes through. There will always be a need for consumers to have transportation in different modes. I think seeing how comfortable people are getting on planes is going to be impactful. I know at GM we've been spending a lot of time doing something called Super Cruise and looking at hands-free driving, and so a whole different way of having transportation happen that allows you to be incredibly safe in your own environment and move forward. So, you know, again, I think these underlying things are going to instruct all of us. When I think about your business and medical device, et cetera, this whole idea about how do you train people, get the exposure to the doctors, but use different techniques to either instruct, demonstrate, do all that. Well, we started something called Cadillac Live, which is a virtual chat. It's called Cadillac Live. So for people who don't want to go to a dealership anymore, it's a virtual chat where they have someone they can make a virtual appointment with. That person has a camera with the vehicle in front of them and can instruct them on any question they have and do it virtually. So, you know, the person doesn't have to leave where they are and where they feel safe to still get the information. I could see something like that being extremely helpful as you look at B2B marketing and you change the way that we do it. All these virtual immersive experiences will change, again, forever, the way we think about interacting, about training, about providing that information to people.
I'm sure you were on that trend well before this, and frankly, on a small level, so was I. They say that video is going to comprise 80% of all content on the web by next year. I don't know where we are right now. This has just accelerated that. And I, for one, implore anyone who will listen to me to record everything they do. And I mean everything, because, I say, you never know when you're going to say something smart. But here's the point. I mean, say, for example, that little, what I just said was a clip, let's say. If I hadn't recorded it, it would be gone. But I can repurpose this.
Yeah.
And anything that comes out in our conversation that may show that I'm smart was just me talking, as opposed to, I have to write a blog post. What am I going to say? And it comes out so much more naturally. So I advise anyone who's willing to listen on this call that when you're just doing what you do, that's when you show your value in a way that there's no packaged marketing is going to do. So I think that Zoom calls and video, another thing is instructions for use are, well, important for you as well. Although I think a lot of people just don't read the manual and they know how to work the car. But you really got to read the manual when you got a new piece of medical equipment. And people would much rather watch a video about how to do that than go through the 20-page. So, yeah.
I know it shows on how we all learn better. I mean, I learned how to do haircuts, so, you know, through YouTube during this COVID period.
With your son?
Yeah, he wouldn't let me touch it, so I finally had to have my sister watch them anyway. So that was a whole nother long story. But to this idea of when does knowledge come through and how do we share it most effectively? I think we will see a whole new level of that going forward because one, we have to. And second, it has much stronger impact. And then third, we're going to have to learn how to edit and do all of this great learning in much more persuasive sound bites and chunks too. It works really well, but we're going to need a higher quality because that's what actually has much bigger impact. So you'll learn, you're already very good at it as you edit your sound bites and where they go, how you then communicate that will have a big impact.
My friend Mauro says, I know who Joe's marketer hero is. Who is Deborah's marketing hero?
Oh, so many. But you know who I really love is a good colleague of mine is Mark Pritchard at Procter & Gamble. He's done an incredible job of transforming that company. And for those of you who went to CES last year, I think it's a classic case of you see a CPG company which suddenly became a tech company as they've realized overall. And they have a great balance of storytelling along with technology that really works for their consumers. So he's definitely one of mine. And I follow that path of, while I love great creative, what I really like is seeing the business model underneath that really takes companies to another level, and where they can go. The other one I'm looking at right now is I love what Satya is doing at Microsoft. I mean, they've had incredible rejuvenation over the last 5 or 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
Marketing played a critical role in that. I think they defined what the love aspect of Microsoft could be, which was always very rational, et cetera, and really use that to inspire all of their communities and their different product lines. Their stock price has more than doubled. They've done tripled, yeah, a great step moving forward. So, when I look at those are the kinds of that's the kind of marketing that I wholly believe in. Combination of beautiful immersive storytelling along with really smart strategic business sense about how you help transform a company from one place to another.
Jeffrey has a really interesting question. Have new individuals, maybe medical experts, become stars that GM or other commercial interests would include in advertising as opposed to sports figures and entertainers? Do you think that, well, Fauci's the easy name to just pull out of a hat, but are there other well-known medical brand name people whose endorsement you think would mean anything in terms of buying a car or perhaps not eating at McDonald's, but you get the idea?
Yeah, well, and that is a great question. I mean, we focused a lot on frontline heroes. We have OnStar, which allows us to be in strong contact with the frontline first responders and do that. But you're right, we actually haven't looked at them as personalities in their own right. It's been the process overall. Right. But there's such benefit to this, and as we think of this idea of personal safety really being important and a huge trend going forward, it's a really clever idea. So you'll have to send me your friend's name and last name, because if we go in that direction, we'll certainly give him some credit for that.
Maybe a new car?
Let's.
And she works on Cadillac primarily. Well, that's not true anymore. You're not the Cadillac lady anymore. You're the everything lady.
No, I love my Cadillacs, but I love all of our cars. In fact, I'm very excited about the future of electric and what impact that has. I'm waiting for my Bolt personally to arrive once we start opening back up again. So.
Fair enough. As a marketer, are you looking at? Have you begun to talk about incorporating COVID-like safety features? Here's a silly example. You're welcome to use it and send me a car. Where do I put my mask? I don't want to use up one of my cup holders. Where do I hang it? Is that something that you'd begin to focus group or think about, or is that just so patently a bad idea we haven't considered it? But you get the idea. Like, where do we put our hand sanitizer? Would you start thinking about that kind of stuff at this point?
Yeah, I mean, we're thinking about all of it as we look at the vehicle overall. So one thing that, again, I don't know how many people know, but in many of our vehicles we have ionizers, which cleans the air inside your vehicle and really helps eliminate anything that could be inside the vehicle. So
that's an option right now, to ionize my car?
Yes, it is. It's an option right now. I actually have it on my Cadillac XT6.
Of course you do.
Of course I do. So I think that's really important. We're looking at this whole idea of how, again, we're about to launch. It's an effort called Clean with all of our dealerships, so that you know where things are, where and how the interior of your vehicle has been sanitized and what's been done there, which I think I know that's important for me every time we get into it. A car even that I just drive, I've got my wipes for doing the steering wheel, the handles, everything. So I think looking at all those, we'll see how long the mask trend is necessary, as it's, depending on how the outbreaks occur. Mm-hmm. This could be something that we need for the next 2 or 3 years. It could be something that changes, but I think we watch very closely consumer trends and where they go, and then how do we configure the vehicle's interior. Now, know that we have we used to have, a 3 or 4 year product cycle. Sorry, we're still doing my lawn outside. Like, what the hell? I think this would have worked if it had been the time I thought it was going to be. So I'm sorry about that. We have usually a couple year product cycle in order to make changes like that. But again, now with our new Ventec,
just change.
you never know. We might have to be thinking differently. So.
I'm so grateful for your time today. I enjoyed this thoroughly. For the folks who asked lots of uh, complicated ventilator questions, we have our chat room. We have a ventilator channel that we just talk about this stuff, so maybe we can help one another answer these questions. And that's my buddy Deborah. I knew her back when she was just a student with me.
I know, who knew where we
Who
would both
knew?
end up. So it's so exciting to be able to do this and see you in your element as well. And again, I know it was a different topic for many of your listeners, but it's been really great to be here with you today.
Thanks, Deb. Bye, everybody. See you next week. Deborah, profound thanks. Really enjoyed this.
Love seeing you. Take care, Jeff.
Bye.
Bye.